Growing up in Oakland, we were always somehow associated with Chinatown. Originally, we lived down in Oakland, Chinatown, right on 10th Street, across from the park on Jefferson. My parents were the typical immigrants. I remember my mom going off to the working in the sewing factories. When she first started, she ended up in one of these sweatshops, which is just around the corner on 10th Street, directly around the corner from the first Asian Health Services site there on 10th and Harrison. And my dad, like a lot of Chinese immigrants, were cooks, because those were the only jobs that were available for Chinese immigrants. Just growing up in Oakland during the 50s and 60s was really what probably influenced me to do what I'm doing. The civil rights movement was going on certainly in the early 60s. When we were in high school, the Vietnam War was going on, and you also had in the proximity of Berkeley where you had the free speech movement. That influence could be felt around all during that time. On the heels of the civil rights movement by the African American community, people of other ethnic groups have said, gee, we've been ignored too. There was a lot of discussion as what we should be doing with ourselves and our careers. How do we give back to the community? I started working with East Bay Chinese Youth Council back in 70 or 71. It was basically a storefront, and we had a community center there, and it was to do summer programs for Chinatown youth. That eventually evolved into EBACA, which was East Bay Asians for Community Action. It was the focal point of the youth movement from UC Berkeley to make changes. There would always be an annual fair, a street fair of some sort at Lincoln Square, and the health always seemed to be one of the major issues. And the health committee, which was one of the programs, eventually developed the idea for the Asian Health Services. They did a survey during the summer. The youth did a survey during the summer about what needs were needed for the immigrant community, and they found that most immigrants were not using county resources and the health system because of the language barriers. People are saying, well, gee, we don't really have health care. What do? We just kind of ignore our problems and not venture off out of the community.
The medical services within the Chinatown community, low-income immigrant Asian Americans, were not there. I mean, there was no such thing as bilingual services.
I became the first director, what we call that, Asian Health Services, and that job was to form a healthcare project, to provide healthcare as well as to make policy changes. Because we always felt that, given the needs, having a clinic by itself would be quite inadequate to provide healthcare for the needs. Part of what we would be doing would be always to make changes in the existing healthcare system. Steve played a very critical role for basically institutionalizing the Asian Health Services. Steve was the first director of the Asian Health Services. And that was the time from summer of 73 through the summer of 75. So in the spring of 1975, at that time, that's when we formed our first clinic.
The Yi brothers continued to devote their efforts toward empowering the community. Larry and Alan went the legal route, and they devoted substantial amounts of time to poverty law, representing Chinatown immigrant garment factory workers, tenants, and protecting their right to housing. Steve went on to medical school, but he continues to provide services to the public, totally dedicated to public medicine. When their father was tragically killed in Chinatown, they turned a very negative, tragic situation into a positive.
My father was involved in a traffic accident where he was a pedestrian crossing the crosswalk at Webster and 8th Street, and that was the heart of Chinatown.
He was running to try to make the light and stepped in the intersection and got hit by a car that just took off a little bit too quickly without looking.
So it was very difficult for us, and to find out the fact that he had just been walking across the street in Chinatown, and someone decided to take off early from the red light and hit my dad. As it turns out, that corner had one of the highest pedestrian accident rates in the city, and traditionally nothing had been done about it.
When the accident happened with Mr. Yi, there was coalesced a movement of community people who thought that finally some attention needs to be paid for the safety of the residents who live in Chinatown rather than the passerbys in cars. So that's sparked a movement led by the Asian Health Services, Chinatown Chamber, and by Alan Yi and the Yi brothers. This idea of designing streets for pedestrian safety came really out of community guardians like the Yi brothers and like Asian Health Services.
People could see the victories in Chinatown if you look at the intersections that have been changed because of what the Asian Health Services and Chinatown Chamber of Commerce and the other Chinatown groups have done in terms of the bulb outs and changing the key intersections. That has happened all throughout Chinatown now. And so to us that was gratifying. Again, nothing would bring back my dad, but at least with those changes, we hope that a similar tragedy will not happen to other families. Again, it just fits in with what Asian Health Services has always done. Serve this community, improve the health care, beyond just providing services. So to us, it was very gratifying.